Hi, I'm Brenda Shavito, and this is You Are Not Alone, the show for news, tips, and stories of hope for those who may be struggling with addiction. My guest today is Mike Shooty. He is the author of Lost in London, A Journey from Insanity to Acceptance, a powerful memoir chronicling his path from addiction to recovery. Through raw honesty and reflection, Mike reveals how embracing vulnerability became the key to transformation. As the founder of Just Today, LLC, and certified recovery coach, he dedicates his life to supporting others on the road to recovery, speaking in communities, collaborating with local centers, and donating a portion of his book proceeds to fund vital recovery services. With a voice shaped by lived experience, Mike is passionate about helping others find hope, purpose, and the courage to rewrite their own stories. Mike, welcome to You Are Not Alone.
Thank you.
So happy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Fabulous.
I'm really happy that we got to connect.
Yeah. Well, we're just going to jump right into it. Your book, Lost in London, A Journey from Insanity to Acceptance. Tell us more about why you chose this title.
Yeah, I think there's two really reasons why I picked that title. First off, the word lost, right? I think that everyone could relate to being lost in some capacity in their life. It's, at some time. And then there's a story within this book, which happened probably 10 years ago, where I was flying into London. And I was there on a business trip, and I was supposed to be there for about 4 days. And I had about 2 years of being sober, and I got there. The first day went really well. Everything was going great. I had met my new boss. And then that evening, I went into a lounge, and I met a couple guys there, and somebody gave me a Heineken. And that's the last thing that I remember for 3 days. And I talk kind of about that story of just being lost and kind of drinking for 2 to 3 days there in London, and then the struggles to even to get back home to the United States. And I was just, it was awful. I was really lost in London, So. But
it left quite an impression on you to use it as the title of your book.
It did, and I had that title in my in my mind for quite some time because even though that I had some very dark times progressing through my substance use disorder and my addiction, Lost in London for some reason just stuck. It just stuck with me. So yeah.
Great. That's good. Yeah. And I noticed when I read the book, first of all, it was poignant. I think I told you this, and I'll say it again. Your writing is so poignant,
great,
and so wonderful. I really, as dark as the subject matter is, and as dark as some of the parts were, I think your writing is fabulous.
Great, thank you.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But you dedicated the book to your sister Kate. Would you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, I struggled with, my addiction for many, many years. And, as you kind of progress through that and multiple rehabs and all these things that are happening in your life, and, you start losing family and friends, and you know what I mean? You start losing your life. You start to isolate all the things that happen with that. But, my sister Kate is 5 years older than me, and we just always had a very strong connection. I have 2 other sisters, but Kate and I were closest at age, so we just were, closer. She, read me stories before I went to bed, and she lent me money when I was trying to get, a date, and she's always been there for me. Right. And she was just the person that never really gave up on me, right? She just stood by my side, holding my hand the whole way through it, So I owe her so much, and that's why I wanted to dedicate a book. So
that's great.
Yeah, very, very close, and so blessed that I have her in my life, And I think there's some, when I do write a little bit about these angelical angels that we have in our life, and my sister was my angelical angel for sure.
Right, and when I did read some areas, some parts where I think she was met with conflict within her own self to, maybe on that cusp of what we say for a loved one is enabling, like, do I go pick him up? Don't I? It's a conflict, a constant conflict that family members find themselves in.
Yeah, it really is. I think that she writes a very nice note at the end of the book, right? And that's where her struggle was, because it was kind of the second or third time that, the police had contacted her, and I had been, in jail. And we all get to that point where, the person needs to try to figure those things out themselves. But I was just very blessed that, she was just there for me. Yeah, she was there, always there, holding my hand.
That's great. That's great.
So
who would you really, let's say a target audience, or who do you think could benefit, or who would be reading your book?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously my book is about recovery and my substance use disorders and all these things. But when people ask me about my book, I say it's a book about my vulnerability to finally get honest in my life, right? And I use the platform of recovery for that, right? But I think you could substitute a lot of different things in our lives, right? We all have to go through some of that pain and suffering. We all have to kind of go through that fire in our lives. And so I think it really resonates with people that may be going through some of that pain in their lives, or have gone through some of that pain. So it's very relatable, I think, to a broad audience out there.
I would agree. Yeah. I would totally agree, because even people on the other side of the coin who may not have ever had any exposures from a loved one or a family member, a friend with addiction, I think it gives them a very good perspective of what this is, and how deceitful and cunning the disease can be. Yeah. And we've talked about that as well, the deceit.
Yeah, and I talk a lot about that in the book, about the deceit of, and that's what addiction is. It's, it takes away the love. It's, you start to become self-absorbed, and the ego and deceit, and it happens, it can happen very fast, it can happen very slow. But that's how I look at it. And, even when I talk about, when I even put a drink down and was sober for a certain amount of time, I never really lived in the world of sobriety. So there was still these areas in my mind of my behavior that were still deceitful.
Okay.
And that's what it does. Right? That's the disease. That's the disease.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, at what point did you think that in your life, or in your addiction, when did you find it to be unmanageable? I mean, it seems to me like for a long time, what I read, for a while, you were a functioning alcoholic. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, you are right. And I tell people, I think that I was an alcoholic even before I picked up my first drink, right? I had a lot of discontent in my mind, and not feeling comfortable in my own skin. And and that started young for me. And then, in my adolescence, where, more in the environmental pieces, right? I had some traumas. They weren't major traumas. I just started to feel uncomfortable and different than other individuals, right? And so at 14, I picked up a drink, right? And I was able to, I would say I was able to manage it. I didn't get into a lot of trouble. But as I look back on some of these things, I have to really be honest with myself that every relationship that I had, was destroyed by that. Was destroyed by alcohol and drugs at some point in my life. And there's this Fleetwood Mac song. It's called Sarah, and I love this song. And the beginning verse of it, it basically says, you said you would give me life, but you never told me about the fire. You said you'd give me life, but you never told me about the fire. And I think of that as my relationships with the people had to watch me go through that. Right. I did promise a lot of people that I was going to be there, but I couldn't, because I had this addiction. I had this pain. I had this fire. And but where it really became unmanageable for me was in my late 30s. Where it was just, I had been married, I had a daughter, I think I had a really nice job. There was a little bit of an entitlement there, and I couldn't stop drinking. You know, I was doing Oxycontin, I was just partying all the time, and it just eventually progressively just ate me alive, right? And that's when I first started to, okay, I do have some issues, I do have some problems. It was my first step into going into rehab. Unfortunately, it still took me a long time to get where I'm at today.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
It's a process.
Yeah.
So during that time where you were active in the addiction, what stopped you, maybe obvious to us, but what stopped you from getting sober? Why couldn't you just say, I've got everything to lose here, you know, Mike, you know, man, you got to stop this, you know, your internal voice telling you have to stop. I mean, elaborate on that.
Yeah, no, I will. Yeah, it's a very good question. And you know, what stopped me from really getting sober is me, right? And I talk a little bit about this. Getting sober is the first step, right? And the first step is getting the alcohol and the drugs out of your body, right? So literally in 5 to 10 days, you can get the booze and drugs out of your body. You are sober. Right. And I could stay sober for many years, right? I could stay sober for, 3-4 years and then decide to pick up a drink and destroy my life. Now, there's a big difference between being sober and sobriety. And until I got into sobriety, where I started to really do the work, because when I was sober, I just told you I did the work. I told you I was going to a meeting. I told you the things, but I never really did the work. Sobriety taught me that. When I started to work with a sponsor, I started doing some steps. I started to look at my character defects. I started to look at past behaviors, my emotions, my traumas. All those things started to come together in that balance for me. And that's how I live today. So
Mike, talk to us a little bit about some of your darkest days.
Yeah, and I'll say there's been a lot of dark days for me, and especially the last, 3 months before I got into kind of into my last rehab. But, the darkest days, one of the darkest days for me was I woke up in jail, didn't know really what had happened or transpired in the last 24 hours. I knew that I had been arrested for a DUI. The sheer terror of that, of being, in jail. And I knew that I just was going to drink my life away. I knew that everything was going to happen. I knew that I was going to basically lose everything because, it was serious trouble for me. And there was no one who was going to pick me up at the jail. And so I ended up Ubering out of the jail. And I went to the one place that I know really well, and that was a bar. And it was later in the afternoon. And I just sat there and drank vodka after vodka after vodka, and got a text from my boss telling me that I had been terminated, which I expected. It just started to snowball. I ran into a friend that evening. I went over his house. We drank and partied till like 3 o'clock in the morning. I just couldn't stop the pain. I just couldn't stop the pain. I woke up in the morning. It was 10 o'clock in the morning on his couch. I Ubered to a supermarket to get something to eat. And when I walked in there, I grabbed a bottle of wine. I went right into the bathroom. I opened the bottle of wine and drank it within probably 10 minutes. And, kind of walked out of there stumbling and decided to go into the front of the store and sit down. And within 10 minutes, there was 2 cops there, and I was intoxicated and I was arrested again. So literally within, 14 to 15 hours of just being released, I was right back into it again. And I was like, what's going on? So
it sounds like it was not a coping mechanism, but your escape mechanism. Let's put it that way. Your escape from reality.
Yeah.
Because doesn't sound like you had come to terms with it yet, even at that point.
Yeah, I was so low. But I kind of was at the end, right? And alcohol at that time was the only thing that could numb everything out for me. I couldn't face reality at that particular time, right? And I didn't want to.
No.
And that's the thing. I didn't want to face it, right? I just knew I was going to drink the rest of my life away.
Right.
So
those dark moments, you wrote about them and they were dark, and you obviously did get motivated, thank God, to get into recovery. But what was that turning point? When did that, let's say, light bulb come on, or how did that happen?
You know, it took me quite some time to get there. You know, it was a kind of a 20-year, history, as I kind of said, get sober and then mess things up, and get sober, mess things up. And I think kind of like the story that I just talked about is I got to that point where, it was even darker than that, where, I wanted to, take my life. And I kind of got to that place. And, for some reason I couldn't do it. I was very, very close, which I write about as well. So finally I got to my last rehab, and I was there for 4 or 5 days, kind of walking around and like, okay,
Again.
And on Sundays in rehab, you can go to church. So I got into this white van and I said, okay, I'm going to go to church, right? And I grew up kind of Catholic, so we went to this Baptist church, Baptist Union Church.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So when I walked in there, I didn't blend too well, right? And I thought I was actually in a sequel of Coming to America too, really. But there was so much joy and there was so much love there.
Right.
And you have to admit, I was just in a fog, and I walked in there and I just kind of looked around, and I was in the middle of kind of everyone around me. And I got a lot of different stares, and I just didn't care. And I got on my knees, and I probably had the first really good cry in a long time. And I don't remember much what I said, but I do remember saying, I can't do this. I can't do this by myself anymore, And so I think that was me and my surrender. And then the other piece that I do remember is saying, give me one more chance. And I still think about that. Right. Give me one more chance. Right. And there was no enlightening, there was no light that came down. Right. I just felt a little lighter. Right. And from that point on, from that day on, that Sunday, I came back to the rehab and I just decided to work for my life. And I've worked every day since. Every day.
Work you have.
Right,
You absolutely have. It is work.
Right, it takes work.
Every single day. Yeah. Well, how did your addiction impact your family, and who was affected the most by it, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, addiction is a family disease, and I destroyed a lot of different relationships over the years, and and I'll back up a little bit. Is that also, they got just tired of it. Like you had to start letting people go as well, right? You kind of come out and you try to make an amends, and some people just don't want to have an amends to you any longer, which is okay. But for me, most person that I affected was my daughter, right? So as I talk to you, telling you when I first went to recovery, my daughter was 5 or 6 years old, right? So she knew as her dad was going to the hospital, and then I would be sober for 3 years, and then something else would happen, right? And she had to live through all those things, right? And that's really painful. And the other pieces I talked a little bit about it was it's not just the alcoholism. I still lived in that world of deceit, so I was still chasing pleasure. Right? So I had an affair, I lost my marriage, I lost that opportunity to be her everyday dad, right? I'm still her father, but there's a big difference between being a dad and a father. Ask any daughter, she knows, right? And so I do have a good relationship with my daughter now, but I mean, that's, I think, who mostly impacted, is my daughter, and the trauma that I had caused her. Right.
What was required of you to right that ship?
Just consistency, I think consistency. I mean, she's still, kind of, I think, scared at times, even though I have years of sobriety now. She's still afraid. It's going to take her time to come to me. She's 18 years old, she's in school and doing her
Right.
own thing, and that's what
Right.
she needs to do.
Absolutely.
Our relationship will hopefully only get better as she matures and understands, the disease of addiction.
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Well, working with people today, what do you use? Like, what are some of the tools that you focus on with working with people who are in recovery, seeking recovery?
Yeah, well, a little bit of both. Yeah, a little bit of both. I mean, I typically, my demographics are working with men who usually are over the age of 30. Okay, I just have a little bit more understanding and relatable if they have kids and married and
Right.
all the things that I had to experience. So, I do work with men, especially when they're coming out of recovery, right? And I think that you mentioned some of this in the past. Is how do you support somebody when they're coming out of recovery? It's good that you got 30, 60 days like sober.
Great.
So now
Yeah,
what you do, if you don't like, AA, people struggle with AA,
Yeah.
and people struggle with recovery dharma, or they struggle with smart recovery. But so what I typically look at is looking at the mind, body, and soul with them. We need to start to balance those things out. And the first thing I always ask somebody is, how can I help you, right? And the second question is, we need to start to uncover why you want to continue to escape and hide in your life, right? It's so you have to start regulating those different or regulating different behaviors. And once we start to uncover those pieces, those traumas, environmental, genetic disposition, some of those things, we create awareness around them. And it's just like I had to do the same thing, right?
Right.
I struggled with comparing my life. My whole life I was always like, I'm not keeping up, or I'm too far ahead. Compare, right?
Right.
I still suffer with that, but it doesn't rotate in my mind every day.
Right.
I know it's coming. So just like as we start creating awareness around that, we can start to shift those behaviors, right? So we focus on the mind. And then the body piece of it is, there's been a lot of chaos and pain and, the nutritional factor of it, right? So the guys that I work with, we start to get them to start to work out. And the guys that do really well really start to look into exercising.
Right.
They can start to feel better instantaneously. They feel better. There's a visual thing there. It keeps the mind moving positively, I guess. And then it's the nutrition factor, right? A lot of the guys that come out, we still have a lot of high anxiety. There might be some deficiencies there. So we will work with their doctor and say, okay, let's see where we can increase some of those, the vitamins or nutritional habits for you. And then it's the soul, right? So like I just said, some people don't like AA, they don't like these meetings, they don't like that, but they have to have some type of connections other than themselves.
Right.
So I've seen guys stay in recovery by just going to the gym. I've seen guys stay in recovery by just going to church.
Right.
So, but we have to find something that works for them. And then, so that's kind of some of the things that I work with them. And then they have the connection with me.
Right.
So we'll work with them until they start feeling more comfortable. And it's important if they're going to a wedding and they haven't, a lot of these things are firsts for people.
Right.
And they don't know how to
recovery.
respond, right? In recovery.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
I wish I had somebody probably, I don't know if I would have used them, but I wish I would have had some of that opportunity to have somebody that kind of understands and walks that walk.
A coach.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So-
Hey, I'm getting ready for this event,
Yeah.
I'm sober and I'm showing up for family and, it's a lot, there's a lot to that situation.
There is.
Right?
There's a lot to that. And I mean, and I can give them they can contact me if there's something that's really struggling with, or they just need to get something off their mind. And it's so important those first, 3-6 months to really get that foundation.
Right.
And then kind of, we can continue to working, or, if they have that ground, that foundation set, they're off to a better start in their lives.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I can't believe we're running out of time, but we still have time to talk about what's life like for you today, and how long are you in recovery?
I don't talk about my sobriety date with anybody except my higher power and my sponsor.
Okay.
And there's a reason why that. I have years of sobriety, but the reason why is that because my pastime, as I've talked about, is I would look at days. I mean, I would look at years. I'd be like, I got 2 years, I got 3 years. I know what's going on. Literally, for me, it's one day at a time.
Right.
And that's the only thing that I really focus on. Now, when I have a year, or I have 3 years, or I have 4 years, I kind of tip my hat and I move forward, and that's it. So how is my life today? My life is it's peaceful. It's a peaceful, good life. Now, I also want to say that it's also a struggle. And here's the reason why. When I started picking up a drink when I was 14 years old, I really didn't become an adult, right? I ran away from a lot of those issues in my life. Now, I did adult things. I bought houses and cars and got married and had all those things. But I never faced a lot of these issues and problems. I just kind of ran away from things. So now that I do live in the world of recovery, I face the same issues that everybody else has, but I face that as an adult now.
Right.
I face the issues that we all have, the death, sickness, and pain, and I can be there, for my family and my friends, and that's a really cool place to be, And the other piece is the connections that I had from writing this book. It's been phenomenal. Like when someone IMs me and they want to talk to me about their story, it makes me feel that everything that I've done has been worth it. And I talk about this because I've shared so much of my story.
Right.
It's just so nice to hear someone else's story and knowing that you're not alone and stepping into that vulnerability and raising your hand and saying, I've had enough. Right. And that's the really cool thing about my life today.
And while there's so many differences when it comes to getting sober, being in recovery, since everybody's story can be so different, so many of them have similarities. They're similar, right? With as many differences as a lot of them are similar. So that's interesting.
And that's been really neat about it is people have reached out to me and it's real connections, right? It's real love. It's not it's not. There's no falsehoods any longer. It's like, let's get real. I surround myself with people that have helped me tremendously along the way, and now I have an opportunity to help them. And, so it's a real blessing. It's really super grateful every day for that.
It is.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Yeah. Well, I've so enjoyed you being here today. Now, if people want to get a hold of you, how can they what's the best way for them to do that?
I mean, the best way to get a hold of me is actually through my website. Justtoday.org, just-today.org. Or you can, follow me on Facebook. You can just reach out to me on my phone number and say, hey, I want to, talk to you. I think the best place from my standpoint is really everything's consolidated in my website. And it gives you a lot of different videos of me on Instagram and TikTok and talking about some other things that, we couldn't share today. Fabulous. But it's pretty powerful
Great. Well, Mike, again, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been enlightening and great. And good luck with the book. Lost in London.
Thank you.
It's worth a read for, I think, any audience.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of You Are Not Alone. If you or a loved one needs help or would like to donate, please visit us anytime at angelsagainstaddiction.org. Remember, you are not alone. I believe that together we can help save lives. Thank you.